587, and it is Psalm 74. Why have you rejected us forever, O God? Why does your anger smoulder against the sheep of your pasture? Remember the people you purchased of old, the tribe of your inheritance, whom you have Mount Zion where you dwell. Turn your steps towards those everlasting ruins. All this destruction the enemy has brought onto this sanctuary. Their foes roar in the place where you met with us. They set up their standards as signs that behave like men wielding axes to cut through a thicket of trees. They smashed all the carved panellings with their axes and their hatchets. They burned your sanctuary to the ground. They defiled the dwelling place of your name. They said in their hearts, we will crush them completely. They burnt every place where God was worshipped in the land. We are given no miraculous signs, no prophets are left, and none of us know how long this will be. How long will the enemy mock you, O God, revile your name forever? Why do you hold back your hand, your right hand? Take it from the folds of your garment and destroy them. But you, O God, are my King from of old. You bring salvation upon the earth.
When do you think you cried first? We're speaking about grieving, but let's talk about another human ability, crying. When did you first cry? I suspect that many of us would say the time I probably first cried was the minute I was born, because up until that moment, I had never really felt a variation in temperature. My eyes had never been assaulted by light. I had never felt people touch me the way the people in the delivery room would. And I never had to inflate my lungs until the minute I was born. And it's no wonder that a lot of babies cry when you think about all the things that's happening at the moment they are born. It's a great grace that any of us get by those opening minutes. But of course, that's not the kind of crying that I'm talking about. That is indeed crying. However, that's the crying of the first birth. And the crying of the first birth is marked by crying, often for yourself, or maybe for others, which could still be for yourself, by yourself. So that's the nature of the first birth's crying. But there is the second birth's crying. And when we cry in light of the second birth, that's the day you can cry properly for the very first time. And to help you see this as a picture, I thought I would share two galleries with you, and then we'll go to the psalm and we'll make the first point about the difference between crying in our first birth and crying after our second birth, when we are, as Jesus would say, born again. During one conference in London, it was the EMA, Proclamation Trust, as the group who did the conference, me and a few ministers from here decided we would go to Tate Modern. We had a few hours to spend, and Alec decided we can get in there, it was free, and we would see some interesting modern art. So there was me, and there was Alec, and there was Tom McWhirter, and we headed off, and we arrived at Tate Modern. And I walked into one of the displays or exhibitions. I really don't know what word I would use to describe it. It was a room the size of the hall. The walls were all painted a uniform colour, maybe a beige or a green. There was no information about the exhibit that you were seeing, and the room was entirely empty apart from one wall. And on one wall, well, let me see if I can explain why I was seeing what I was seeing. If you grew up in the 70s or maybe before it started, do you remember that people used to buy birds, like porcelain birds taking off in flight, and they would put them on their wall, and they would put one and then another one at 45 degrees and then another one? Did anybody ever go in a house that people had done that? You know, these were not people who went bird hunting or bird watching, but somehow there was a period, possibly the 60s, certainly the 70s, where also if it wasn't on a wall, some people put them on windows as a silhouette Well, anyway, I think the artist must have seen this when they were younger, and they were harking back to it, because on the far wall were 4 crows taking off in flight, just like those porcelain ones I had seen growing up, with one horrific difference. An arrow had been fired into each one, pinning it to the wall. And that was art. Well, being Scots, do you know what I thought? I'm glad I didn't pay to come in here. Inside Florence, there are many galleries, and there's one called the Palazzo Pizzi, which is the home of a family who were fantastically wealthy. Dante speaks about them in the Divine Comedy. They effectively ran Tuscany, and I suppose after unification, they would run what was Italy, or the new state of Italy, now Italy as we know it. They were called the Medicis. And inside their house, well, there's art. But everything in their house is art. I mean everything. And it's amazing the things that's inside this house. There's the original picture of Oliver Cromwell, the one where he said to the artist, "Paint me warts and all." That was hanging there. I was quite surprised that a militant Protestant would be found inside an Italian family's home. But every artwork there is framed. It's framed in beautiful craftsmanship. The wood is carved, often gold. There's information about who the painting is, who painted it, and when they painted it. Even the painting on the ceiling is framed by the cornicing. The walls are painted, and they're framed by lintels and joists which are carved by human hand. Even the doorways you walk through are all carved. The entire house is art, not just the stuff hanging on the wall. The entire palace is really just art. It's all framed. So, let's think about that. One gallery that has zero framing. It just has something called art fired onto the wall. The second gallery, where everything is framed properly. The first birth. I cry, but I cry for me by me. I cry for myself by myself. The second cry, the lament, because this month we're looking at the laments that take you from the hard place to the best place, thus preparing us for the greatest hard place to the best place, the Lord Jesus going to the cross. If you now look at the first 11 verses of Psalm 74, see what gallery the psalmist is in. How is he framing his prayer? Is it all about me, myself, and I? Or is it soaked, immersed, surrounded in God? Verse 1. O God, why do you cast us off forever, and your anger smoke against the sheep of your pasture? Remember your congregation you have purchased of old, which you redeemed. Remember Mount Zion, where you have dwelt. Direct your steps to the ruins. The enemy have destroyed the sanctuary. The temple is being burned to the ground, and the people of God are taken to what is modern-day Iraq, ancient Babylon, as slaves. Your foes have roared in the midst of your meeting place. They chopped down the carved wood with hatchets and hammers. They set your sanctuary on fire. We will utterly subdue them, they said, and they burned all the meeting places of God in our land. We do not see signs or any prophet among us. How long, O God, is the foe to scoff? Why do you hold back your hand? Take it from the fold of, well, you know what the next word's going to be, your garment. There's a difference between the first crying and the second crying. If you're not a Christian, of course you cry. And if you're a Christian, of course you cry. The difference is how you're going to do it. If you are not inside Christ by faith, You're going to cry because you're going to love people and you're going to be disappointed, but you will have no real means of drying your tears. I'll say that to those of you who have no faith this morning. You will struggle to dry your tears. And what I'm offering you this morning is a gospel that says you will be able to dry your tears. Jesus is not saying you won't cry. He's saying, I'll dry your tears. Now, last week there was homework. I don't want to be one of those people who issue homework and don't do it themselves. You know those people at work that come, have you done that yet? Have you done that yet? And you want to say to them, have you done what you were meant to be doing? Because you've got plenty of time to come and chase me up to see if I've done my stuff. What about your stuff? Well, here's my 12 promises. And the last one, what do you think it might be? We're talking about crying there. It's from the book of Revelation, near the end. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. That's it, Tammy. That's my last promise. What a promise. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Well, how will he do it? Well, the psalmist gives you a window into how that's going to happen. And he says 3 things about God. He is a loving king. He is a powerful king. And he is a faithful king. So let's take the 3. And as Samuel Rutherford would say along at Anworth in the 1600s about Christ's napkin, the gospel, he said, it was like a napkin that you would wipe the tear from your eyes with. You can do that 3 times this morning. So let's see how he's a loving king. Verse 12. Yet my God and King is from old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. He begins with that. This king is working salvation. Why does he begin with that? People might shout out motor neuron disease. That's a terrible thing, isn't it? Oh, absolutely. I would not play that down. Motor neuron disease is a fearsome thing. Somebody else might shout out Israel and Gaza, Ukraine and Russia. Are these not staggering things? Yes, they are. Are people in all these lands not reduced to weeping? Yes, they are. Is it not tough for them? Well, of course it's tough for them. But I tell you what's tougher, 1 second inside hell. 1 second inside there is tougher than all the wars put together and multiplied by the biggest number you can imagine. 1 second inside there. So the greatest promise of all is not peace on earth. The greatest promise of all is not, I'm healthy and I can hold my breath for 3 minutes. The greatest promise of all is not, well, I'm wealthy and I don't need to use the food bank. The greatest promise and work of all is salvation. Jesus said, you know, if you were to inherit the entire world and be richer than the Medicis, he didn't say that, but he probably knew them. And you lose your soul, what good is it? So the psalm begins with the greatest promise of all. He's offering salvation, which is a life beyond this life. You'll be helped now, and you're in glory hereafter. The greatest promise of all, salvation, that you'll live beyond. You can be with those again you've loved beyond here with him. It's the greatest promise, and that's why it starts as the first promise. And the psalmist, as he watches the temple burn and his friends being taken off to a foreign land, he's able to wipe the tear from his eye. But he's able to do it a second time because he says not only is God a loving king, but he's a powerful king. Now from verses 13 to 18, listen to how every statement is about power that no human being has, no scientific company have, no nation has. You divided the sea by your might, and you broke the heads of the sea and monsters in the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan, you split open the springs. The day is yours, the night is yours. You've established the lights and the sun, and you've fixed all the boundaries of the earth, and you've made the summer, and you've made the winter. Okay, so all of creation is running, the psalmist says, because of the hand of God. Such is God's power. The reason the world is running the way it is, orbits happening in solar systems, heat from the sun, time, space, it's God's hand that's doing it. It's not something that's staggered out of a lucky bag from a corner shop. It's put here intentionally. Abraham Kuyper, the Dutch theologian, said there's not an area of creation that Jesus doesn't stand and say, mine. R.C. Sproul, an American Presbyterian minister, now in glory, said, there are no rogue particles inside God's universe. It's accounted for. And this is the point of his power. The psalmist is saying, because God is powerful over it all is accountable to God. Because he's powerful over it all is accountable to God. Which means there is, as we said several months ago, a justice day. We give an account for our lives. Now, before I was a Christian, I would have said what I'm going to say now. That's little help to you, surely. If you're standing in Israel and it was your daughter that was put on the X Twitter feed, being taken away, soiled in her own garments, and covered in blood, and hasn't been seen of in 13 weeks. Little comfort that is if you stand in a street in Gaza and a rocket flies straight in to the side of a building, and within 25 seconds, the thing is leveled to the ground, and you think to yourself, were there people in there? Or was that only Hamas terrorists that were in there? Little comfort when it's you who's told, you've got 6 months to live, but I've got 3 kids, and they're all at primary school. Where's the comfort if you're waiting for judgment and accountability then? Well, where's the comfort if there's no judgment? What are you saying to those people who watch their loved ones being dragged off by people who might well get away with it? There's no accountability. And your daughter's death matters nothing. There'll be no justice. They've done it, and they've got away with it. What does it mean when the tower block crashes to the ground and you think, there must have been families in there? It means nothing for those who refuse God's justice. It means it happened and there's nothing else. What does it mean for the mum who, because of a tumour in the head, doesn't see the children grow? It means she never sees them again, and there's no hope of ever seeing them again. So when a person pushes back and says, this business of being accountable to God and judgment by God and justice by God, what a pointless exercise. No, what a pointless exercise to say you live in this world. All these things are happening and there's absolutely nothing to be said by it. That's a cold understanding of the world. That's more an opium than the promise of the gospel. So the psalmist says, God is a loving king and he's working salvation. There's nothing bigger than salvation. God is a powerful king and he will bring justice. And the third is that he's a faithful king. And as he's talking at the end of the psalm, the closing verses, he makes reference to all the other people. The dove, he says, don't sacrifice the dove, your people. Let the poor praise you, the downtrodden. Don't bring them to shame. Arise and defend us. Have regard for your covenant. In other words, the promises you made. There's 2 ways of living your Christian life. You can come here and think this is all about me promising things before God to live a better life. And I reckon you'll get as far along the road as Leighton can hold his breath, if that's the way you're going to do it. The great German Protestant Martin Luther at the Reformation, in his book, which has prayers in it, there's a fascinating prayer. His prayers were very informal, sometimes quite chatty, and he says this before he goes to take a service. So he's in what they call the sacristy. It's like a vestry. He says, Lord, I'm glad this is not down to me. Because if it was down to me, I would have ruined it a long time ago. It's down to you. We don't come here with our promises for him. We gather here under his promises for us. The most effective praying is the praying, as we've seen in the videos over the last few weeks, that hold God to God's promises, not our promises. And this is how the psalmist closes. Dry your eyes, Israel, he says. God has made promises for us. This is not the end. You're not defined by war. You're not defined by death. You're not defined by illness. You're not defined by sin. You are defined by the love of a powerful, judging, and faithful God. So I'm not the kind of person who'll stay here and say, don't worry, you're not going to cry. You will. There's 3 funerals this week. There might be some crying. I tell you what though, for those in Christ, all those tears that might be shed, not one of them will be wasted.